Have you ever seen Chicago come to a dead stop? I'm not talking about rush hour traffic when everyone's tired and the horns turn into a symphony no one wants to hear. I mean 4,000 autonomous cars frozen in place across the city, like someone pressed pause on an entire metropolis with one cold, decisive touch. I know exactly what that feels like because I'm the one who made it happen, and I did it completely legally. My name is Marcus Hale, and I'm 50 years old. It's the age when a man finally understands he's lived long enough to see the real cost behind every promise this industry makes. I'm not young enough to chase shiny notions of innovation at all costs, but I'm not old enough to pretend I don't know better. Sometimes to protect what matters, you stand up. Or in my case, you quietly walk away. On that frozen Chicago morning, I walked into the control hub at 4 o'clock in the morning. For most people, that's the hour you roll over and sleep a little longer. For me, it's been the rhythm of the last 12 years. Cold blue LEDs spilled over the rows of control boards, a glow I could recognize even with my eyes closed. The servers hummed like the metallic heartbeat of a city that never sleeps. People like to say Chicago runs on jazz and the wind off Lake Michigan, but I know most of it runs on the chips behind me. I always take a slow lap around the room before starting my shift. Not to check the system, but to remind myself that millions of people depend on the tiny things I do. Every packet of data is routed the right way. Every priority command is assigned correctly. Every clean line of code means a mother gets home safely, an elderly man makes his doctor's appointment on time, or a driver avoids slamming the brakes because an autonomous car changed lanes at the wrong second. I'm not a dreamer, but I know my work matters. I'm the backbone behind Fleet Corps, the largest autonomous fleet system in the Midwest. The city depends on it, and it depends on me 52. That kind of dependence steals more sleep than anyone realizes. But that's the cost of responsibility. I accepted that long ago. But on the morning Chicago stopped moving, I no longer worked for Urban Ride. That decision had been made just hours earlier for a reason so absurd that some people would swear I made it up to add drama. But no, real life sometimes writes scripts even Hollywood would sigh at. It all began when they handed authority to the owner's fiancée, a woman who had never worked a night shift, never faced a wall of red alerts, never taken an emergency call from traffic control, never watched an autonomous car fail in the middle of a snowstorm. But she knew how to say words like optimize, disrupt, and youthful culture. And in some companies, that's all it takes to crush 12 years of experience. You might wonder why a company would gamble the fate of an entire city on someone like that. The answer is simple. Love doesn't need logic, and power rarely arrives with competence. I'd seen it happen in other places, but when it finally landed on my doorstep, I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. Before I go on, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? Maybe New York or Florida. Maybe a quiet little town somewhere in Montana. Or Toronto in the cold. London before sunrise. Or a small beach in Australia where the only sound is the waves. I'm 50 now, and at this age I like knowing which time zones my story travels across. It makes me feel like I'm sitting in a familiar cafe somewhere warm and calm, talking to old friends I've never met. That morning, staring at the blinking monitors, I couldn't have imagined that just 24 hours earlier, I was still the one keeping Fleet Corps running smoothly. Still the man the night shift staff called whenever something looked off. Still the first person traffic control depended on when the system hiccuped. Still the one the engineering team trusted without hesitation. 24 hours, short enough that you barely register you've been pushed off the board. So to understand why Chicago froze that day, I need to take you back 24 hours before everything collapsed. Because what broke wasn't the technology. It was the arrogance of a few people who believed a system would kneel simply because they wanted it to. It started the previous morning when I walked into the meeting room and saw the owner's son and his fiancée waiting with the kind of smile every veteran recognizes instantly. The smile people wear right before they replace you. And I, the man who kept a city moving for more than a decade, sat down across from them with no idea that the next morning, Chicago would come to a standstill. All because of their decision, not mine. So come with me. Back to that moment. 24 hours before the city froze. 24 hours before everything broke. AC. 24 hours before I walked away from the company I had given half my life to. And 24 hours before they learned that sometimes the thing you dismiss is the very thing holding your entire world up. If you want to know what really set off the chain reaction that ended with Chicago frozen in place that day, it started with the meeting on the morning before the collapse. I walked into the small conference room on the 8th floor, the one where every important decision used to be made. I had known that room for 12 years, but that morning the air felt different. Not the smell of coffee, not the soft hum of the vents, but something faint like static, warning me that something was about to shift. And it did. Sitting at the head of the table was Dylan Mercer, 32 years old, the son of a CEO who had stepped into the role just 6 months earlier. Dylan looked like he had walked straight out of a tech summit in San Francisco, the kind where people talk about the future without fully understanding the present. Dark shirt, premium bomber jacket, spotless white sneakers that looked like they had never touched Chicago pavement. His hair was trimmed in that style magazines like to call startup energy. Plenty of confidence. Very little real field experience. Dylan wasn't a bad person. I understood that within minutes. He was the kind of man who believed the right buzzwords and enough enthusiasm could fix any problem. He believed in change, and that part wasn't wrong. But change without understanding the foundation only leads to collapse. Sitting beside him was the person who played a major part in the decision to fire me, Bella Rowan. She was Dylan's fiancée and called herself a data strategist, one of those titles that sound like they were invented in some glossy recruiting brochure. Bella looked perfectly composed. A beige blazer, long loose waves, makeup done so neatly it felt like the air around her was obliged to pay attention. In her hand was a pastel tablet with a metallic sheen on the case. The way Bella smiled at me told me she had already decided I was the kind of man who resisted change. Not out of malice, just the look of someone who had never been close enough to the weight of real responsibility. Dylan began the meeting with bright enthusiasm. Marcus, glad you're here. We're reviewing a restructuring of the operations framework. Urban Ride needs to step into a more modern phase. Leaner, cleaner. I simply nodded. I'd heard this line more times in my life than I could count. It was almost always the opening act to a reckless decision. Bella cleared her throat and tilted the tablet toward me. We want to make FleetCor more user-friendly, the current system. She paused to pick her words. It looks too dense, a little outdated, and the error codes make non-technical users anxious. She opened the design interface she had prepared. I could tell she'd put time and effort into it. And to be fair, it was beautiful. Smooth, minimal, pastel colors arranged just right. The problem was that it looked like it belonged to a food delivery app, not the system coordinating thousands of autonomous vehicles moving through a real city. I asked gently, and the status codes are replaced with these tiny icons. Bella smiled with full confidence. We don't want operators overwhelmed by harsh numbers and rigid symbols. If everything is soft and intuitive, they'll feel less stressed. Technology should feel comforting. I watched her for a moment, then spoke evenly. Chicago streets don't run on pastel colors, Bella. She froze just slightly, then asked, Sharper, what do you mean? I pointed to the corner of her screen. If an autonomous car loses its positioning on the highway at 2 in the morning, the operator doesn't have time to interpret a pale blue droplet icon. They need a clear error code. They need the severity level instantly. One wrong interpretation and the price is someone's safety. Dylan stepped in, his voice controlled. Marcus, we just want to make operations easier, something anyone could do. I kept my tone steady. Dylan, FleetCor operators are not just anyone. They carry responsibility for millions of lives out there. Simplicity is fine, but not at the cost of hiding critical information. Sometimes complexity is what keeps people alive. Bella glanced at Dylan, a flicker of expectation in her eyes, as if urging him to back her up. Dylan hesitated. It was clear they weren't fully aligned. Dylan wanted to please Bella. Bella wanted to prove herself. And I only wanted the system not to turn into a pretty empty box. The air tightened a bit. Not the tension of an argument, but the tension of two young people trying not to lose face. In that moment, I saw them clearly. Dylan wanted to be seen as the reformer. Bella wanted to leave her personal mark, to prove that her aesthetic vision was a strategy. I understood them. And that was exactly why I worried. I didn't blame Bella for wanting a beautiful interface. Who doesn't like things that look refined? But what worried me was this. She had never worked a night shift in a snowstorm, never taken a 3 in the morning emergency call, never watched 300 cars funnel into one frozen lane because sensors failed. Those things don't show up in a pastel dashboard. Dylan took a sip of water and said, "We could try building a hybrid version. Keep some core codes, but allow users to switch to the new interface." Bella held his gaze for a moment, then looked at me. "Or we could be more decisive. Simplify operations. If you're still here, Marcus, you'll need to let go of the old mindset. We're moving toward the future." I replied quietly, "The future is fine, but the future still has to run on real streets." It wasn't aimed at anyone, it was just the truth. But I saw Dylan's shoulders stiffen and Bella's lips pressed together. It didn't take more than that to know the hillside had already started sliding, waiting for the final shove. As I walked out of that meeting, I felt it clearly. A system being redesigned from the surface, without understanding the foundation, always collapses most unexpectedly. What I didn't expect was how soon that collapse would come, and that it would bring all of Chicago to a halt. I used to think that even people who barely understood the system would at least treat it with caution. Maybe they didn't know the technical details, but they usually knew there were things you simply didn't touch. But after that pastel interface meeting in the morning, I started realizing that this expectation was a little optimistic. Because that very afternoon, Dylan and Bella kept pushing the so-called innovation experiment they were chasing, and this time they set their sights on the operations staff. The second meeting happened just 3 hours after the first one. I opened my email and saw the subject line, short and cold as stone, operational restructuring. With 12 years in this field, I knew this kind of meeting never brought good news to anyone. The conference room door opened. Familiar faces were already there. Every one of them had spent long winter nights beside me, keeping the system alive when sensors froze, and error reports flooded in. They said nothing, but their eyes were tight with worry. Dylan stood up first, looking more formal than he had a few hours earlier. I assume Bella advised him to do that. He opened a slide deck, speaking with the confident tone of someone presenting at a tech conference instead of talking to the people who had protected an entire city for more than a decade. "We need change. Urban Ride has grown too fast. Operations are bloated beyond necessity. The board wants lower costs but higher quality." I had heard this line before. It was always lower costs and higher quality, as if human beings were software you could simply update. I stayed silent. Bella stepped forward and lifted her tablet. Beautiful charts popped onto the screen like a designer's color palette. "Based on my analysis, operations are overstaffed by at least 30%. The system can handle more on its own. The fewer humans touch it, the fewer mistakes occur." A young engineer at the end of the table frowned. I knew exactly what that meant. Those charts didn't reflect the blizzard last winter when he sat shivering in the control room, trying to keep the Western Quarter from collapsing. But you can't put that kind of fear into a graph. I asked calmly, "Bella, does your analysis include the times Fleet Corps failed to balance routing when left fully automated?" Bella hesitated for a second but stayed composed. "Those were issues with the old system. We are going to change everything anyway." Everything. From the way she said it, I could tell she had no idea how complicated everything really was. The meeting ended without immediate action, but everyone understood one thing. The storm warning had already been issued. I thought things would pause for at least a few days, but they didn't. The next day, everything escalated faster than any software update Dylan kept talking about. By noon the next day, I was on shift in the control hub with the operations team. It was that transition period between the morning rush and the steadier, midday flow. The screens displayed thousands of bright dots representing autonomous cars moving like fireflies across Chicago. In the cold blue glow, the room carried its usual rhythm, focused, orderly, with a thin line of tension that only people who have worked night shifts truly understand. The door swung open. Dylan walked in first, Bella right behind him. The room changed instantly. A sudden visit from leadership in an operations center always feels like the head of a hospital doing surprise inspections. No one relaxes. "Hello, everyone." Dylan said, his voice slightly higher than normal. We want to see the system running in real time, just to understand how it reacts. I nodded and stepped aside to give them space. I've always believed that part of learning is experiencing things firsthand. But I also believe that firsthand experience doesn't mean touching every button you see. This is the South Corridor, I explained, pointing at the screen. And here is the flow near the hospital district. These lanes are priority routes. If you touch the wrong one, vehicles get diverted into unsuitable paths. I didn't even finish before Dylan spoke. I'm just trying something. If the system is good, it should adjust itself. And with that, he pressed a priority reroute command. A red alert flashed. Within 2 seconds, the cluster of vehicles leaving the center began shifting toward a secondary route. The live camera feed showed a car approaching a school zone slowing abruptly as its sensors detected unexpected traffic ahead. Secondary routes started absorbing abnormal load. Bella gasped softly as she had just witnessed a tech demo. See, it is redistributing on its own. I didn't gasp. I placed my hands on the main console and initiated an override. 6 seconds later, the system stabilized, and all routes returned to normal. 8 seconds total. 8 seconds that could have locked up a major intersection if no one was watching. And traffic jams with autonomous vehicles aren't like regular cars. When sensors panic, everything freezes. One jam becomes a chain reaction. I turned to Dylan, my voice steady and almost so soft that anyone unfamiliar with the job would think I was making small talk. Next time, don't touch that if you want this city to sleep peacefully tonight. The room let out a quiet, nervous laugh. Not laughing at Dylan, but laughing the way people do when they escape something that could have gone very wrong. A young engineer exhaled deeply and shook his head like he was saying that was close. Dylan's face flushed. Not because of me, but because he knew he had been reckless in front of the entire team. I just wanted to test the system, Dylan said, trying to stay composed. And nothing broke. Nothing broke because I was standing here, I replied. But another minute and the school zone would have received triple its normal traffic. And when hundreds of autonomous vehicles freeze at once, no one can explain to parents why their children didn't make it home. Bella folded her arms, her tone colder. Are you trying to scare us, Marcus? I shook my head. I don't need to scare anyone. I'm telling you what I've seen. This system doesn't think like a human. It doesn't know you were just trying something. It only knows whether a command is right or wrong. In that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen clearly in most of my career. Dylan wasn't a bad man. He was just afraid of being seen as inadequate. Bella wasn't malicious. She was afraid her ideas wouldn't be respected. Two young people, two big egos, standing inside a system they believed they understood after a few meetings and a handful of experimental clicks. And in that moment, I finally understood something. Neither of them wanted danger. They weren't villains. They simply didn't understand the cost of a mistake. They had never worked a night shift. And if nothing changed, Chicago would see the consequences soon. What I didn't expect was how soon. Soon turned out to mean the very next day. I had always believed that every system carried a soul of its own. FleetCor was never a lifeless block of software. It was the sum of thousands of small human decisions poured into it over the years. Every rule, every priority route, every script was a lesson learned from some past failure. And most of those lessons lived inside the rule sets I had written, patched, and refined across 12 years. The irony was that most of those never made it into official documentation. Not because I hid them. In this kind of environment, if something works, people leave it alone. They rarely ask why it works. Right after Dylan's little experiment with FleetCor, I knew I had to re-examine every right and responsibility tied to my position, not to get revenge. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I simply needed to know my legal boundaries before people who didn't understand the system tried to make decisions in my place. I opened the internal archive, the place holding every dusty document from the days when Urban Ride had only one office floor and 20 autonomous cars running trial routes. I scrolled down to the 2011 compliance agreement, a contract I signed the day I joined, back when the old CEO understood the company would live or die by its precision. I flipped through the pages until I stopped at Clause 12.4, Purge of Personal Optimization upon Role Deactivation. I read slowly, letting the words settle after all these years. The clause stated that any tool, algorithm, rule set, or optimization created from an employee's personal contribution that was not part of the official framework had to be wiped from the system when that employee was deactivated or left their role. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a hidden clause meant for corporate games. It was law, written to protect the company and also protect the person who created those optimizations. Back in 2011, they worried that if someone left, the system would depend on something only that person understood. Clause 12.4 required that anything personal be purged, not left running under the company's name. I leaned back and stared at the servers. Their pale blue glow pulsed like the breathing of metal. I thought about the small optimizations I had added to Fleet Core in the past few months. The morning east side rush hour routing logic, the cold wind night clog prevention rule, and the anomaly sensor detector during humid conditions. All of them lived inside the personal optimization directory, exactly as required. And by procedure, if I were fired or my access disabled, I would be obligated to purge them. But Dylan and Bella had no idea that so much of Fleet Core now relied on those very optimizations. They thought the system was simply intelligent. But the system was intelligent because someone made it intelligent in silence. I began moving every rule set into the proper personal folder, following the old 2011 structure, not to hide anything, but to ensure everything sat exactly where the clause required it to be purged if the time came. I opened the admin page and typed in each familiar command. My rule sets appeared like the handwritten notes of a longtime craftsman. Nothing flashy, nothing beautiful, but precise, durable, and the reason the city had been saved more than once. I added descriptions to each entry, noting dates, hours, reasons, and behavior. Cleaned out every leftover link that tied them to the main system so anyone reviewing them could see clearly that these were personal optimizations, not default code. I wanted everything to be completely transparent. Whatever happened next, I didn't want anyone to claim I had done something in the shadows. I wanted to stand in front of any committee, look them straight in the eye, and say I followed procedure, contract, and law. After reorganizing every optimization into the personal optimization directory, I drafted a memo to HR. No embellishment, just what mattered. To human resources, I confirmed that all personal rule sets have been categorized according to Clause 12.4 of the 2011 Compliance Agreement. In the event of a personnel change or deactivation of my account, please note that these items must be purged immediately to maintain system integrity. Regards, Marcus Hale. I sent it off, clean and final. Just then I heard the sound of heels on the hard floor. Bella walked past the control hub, tablet tucked under her arm. She paused when she saw me closing active sessions. "You're cleaning up your workspace," she said lightly, trying to sound friendly. I turned toward her. "Yes, I'm organizing everything according to protocol." Bella smiled a small smile, the kind people wear when they think they're teaching someone how the world works. "Good. I'm glad you're cooperating. Urban Ride needs people who know how to adapt." She walked on, her steps soft, as if she had just solved something important. I watched her go. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I simply heard her words again in my head. Urban Ride needs people who know how to adapt. I let out a quiet, almost amused breath. Not bitter, just truthful. The problem with overly confident people isn't that they're dangerous. It's that they assume everyone else is slower than they are. I turned back to the screen. The list of rule sets in the personal optimization directory glowed clearly. Each one was a backbone piece of Fleet Core that they didn't know existed. There was no revenge in what I did, only accuracy. I was following the contract exactly as written. If they decided to remove me, the clause would activate on its own, and then Fleet Core would run only on what they understood. The only issue was that they understood nothing at all. The next day, I received an unexpected meeting notice from HR. 4 words only, inviting Marcus to attend. No context, no reason, no agenda. Anyone who has ever worked in tech in the United States knows this type of email is never good news. I arrived at the conference room on the 8th floor. A room that was usually bright now felt unnaturally solemn. Frosted glass closed off the view. Only 3 people sat at the table. Dylan, Bella, and Melissa from HR, the woman who recorded everything with the speed of an old typewriter. I pulled out a chair and sat down. No one invited me. No one offered a handshake. I had been through enough meetings like this to know all I had to do was sit quietly. Bella started like she had been assigned the opening act. Marcus, we invited you here to discuss Urban Ride's new cultural direction. The company is shifting toward a younger, more flexible, more modern identity. I stayed silent. She continued, taking my silence as permission to keep performing. We want to cultivate a spirit of renewal, an environment where everyone is open to improvement, change, and modern approaches. We have noticed, she paused to choose her words, that some individuals no longer align with that spirit. Dylan sat beside her, fingers interlocked, eyes fixed on the table as if he needed to gather courage. He was clearly uncomfortable. I recognized that tension. It was the tension of someone carrying out an action they didn't truly believe in. Melissa never lifted her head. She only took notes, steady as a clock. Bella ended her speech with a line everyone in this industry has heard at least once. Urban Ride needs people who know how to adapt. You understand that, right? I said nothing, not because I wanted to appear noble, but because I knew how these meetings worked. They didn't ask questions to hear your answer. They asked to pretend they had engaged in a fair discussion. Dylan took a deep breath. He placed his hands on the table and straightened his posture to seem decisive. Marcus, after review, we have decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. The reason is that you no longer adapt to the company's innovation process. I looked at him for a few seconds, not to intimidate him, just to see whether he believed the words coming out of his mouth. He held my gaze for barely 2 seconds before lowering his eyes again. I nodded once. No objection, no argument. If you believe I'm standing in the way of innovation, then try innovating without me. Bella smirked, assuming I was trying to make a point. Dylan, however, went slightly pale. He sensed something in my words that wasn't a challenge at all. It was a reminder. Melissa placed a sheet of paper on the table. This is the official notice. We need you to hand over all assets, access credentials, and optimization tools you manage. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and pointed to the drawer beside me. The passwords are in there. All three turned their heads, but the drawer was empty, nothing but air. Bella frowned. What do you mean? I folded my arms. I do not keep any credentials. Everything has been placed exactly where protocol requires. I sent HR a memo this morning. You would have seen it if you checked your email. Melissa reviewed the folder in her laptop. A few seconds later, she nodded. He did send it. Everything is categorized under personal optimization. According to clause 12.4, those items must be purged when the account is deactivated. Bella spun toward Dylan, irritation clear on her face. I thought that was a small part. I answered calmly, small or large makes no difference. A clause is a clause, and every personal rule set must be deleted when the associated employee is deactivated. That is how the company protects itself. I did not invent that rule, I simply followed it. Dylan swallowed, his eyes shifting. He understood, or at least began to understand, that those so-called personal optimizations were not minor details the way Bella imagined. He spoke again, trying to steady his tone. Marcus, we need you to give us information so the system keeps running smoothly. No, I do not need to say anything. The contract already said everything for me. I turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one reached out for a handshake. The silence in the room felt like dust settling on an old object. Quiet, cold, final. As the door closed behind me, my phone vibrated. One notification, your account has been deactivated. That moment, not the meeting and not the termination announcement, was the moment clause 12.4 activated. Fleet Core accessed the personal optimization directory automatically. Each rule set was flagged. Each optimization was identified. Then a purge command swept through the system, clean and absolute, like a blade cutting every thread that held the network together. I did not touch a thing. I did not press any button. I simply stepped into the elevator and watched the floor numbers drop. The domino had been pushed, and the irony was that no one in that room realized they were the ones who pushed it. I merely stepped aside and watched it fall. Chicago was still running smoothly at that moment. but only because the purged parts had not yet reached the final stage. In a few minutes, they would learn exactly how a prettier, simpler system performs when every bit of its intelligence disappears, according to a rule they never bothered to read. I walked out of the urban ride building in silence. No anger, no regret, just the light, hollow feeling of a man stepping away from a place he knows he no longer belongs to. Chicago that afternoon was cold but clear, the kind of cold that sharpens your senses instead of making you shiver. I walked along the river and stopped at a small cafe with large windows facing the street. At 50, I prefer quiet spaces like this, places where you can hear the sound of a spoon striking a cup. I ordered a hot black coffee, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. Not because I still owed Urban Ride anything. After 30 years in operations, monitoring the city's pulse felt more like a habit than a duty. The traffic map showed 3:28 in the afternoon. In 2 minutes, exactly at the data refresh cycle, Clause 12.4 would complete its job, and Chicago would learn what it feels like to lose the person holding it together in silence. My coffee was still steaming when the first red dot appeared on the map. An autonomous car stalled at an intersection with no error message, no signal, just stopped. A minute later, a second red dot, then a third, then a whole line. As if something had drained the life out of them, Chicago began to slow. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply observed. When you have saved this city from hundreds of gridlocks caused by system faults, you learn to look at incidents without emotion. Trust me, emotion has never cleared traffic. The hot spots spread. Roads that were always busy shifted from yellow to solid red. The Wabash Bridge jammed. The Randolph entrance locked up completely. A 6-mile stretch showed continuous congestion for 5 minutes straight. On my phone, the news alert came sooner than I expected. Autonomous fleet stall causes major disruption, downtown. A reporter stood in the middle of the street with rows of stalled white cars behind her, their lights flickering tiredly. With fire engine sirens echoing in the distance, she tried to describe the situation, but she looked like someone standing in the middle of a rising glacier. Public cameras showed the same scene everywhere. Autonomous vehicles frozen like statues, but pedestrians scrambling to find detours, a few human drivers trying to weave through, getting stuck themselves, causing minor collisions. A silver SUV trapped between 2 lanes bumped the rear of a stalled autonomous car, forcing officers to block 2 lanes. The system had officially lost its rhythm. My phone buzzed again and again. I didn't need to check to know who it was. In my head, I could picture Dylan spinning in circles in front of a dashboard full of question marks, while Bella tried to explain things with words like display glitch and connection fault and sensor error, as if repeating them would make the system obey. I took a sip of coffee. The familiar bitterness settled on my tongue. Not triumph, not satisfied. Just the quiet feeling of someone who warned them and wasn't heard. This wasn't a disaster I created. This was simply what happens when people refuse to listen. A traffic officer on the news tried to direct cars by hand, but with hundreds of driverless vehicles, it was a futile attempt. News outlets and social media were flooded with videos of long, frozen lines of cars under Chicago's winter glare. Urban Ride issued a statement calling it a minor technical hiccup. No one believed it. A draft of cold wind seeped through the window frame as people in the cafe began checking the news on their phones. An elderly man beside me shook his head. I don't get it. If all these autonomous cars shut down at once, what are they good for? I answered quietly, my tone as calm as if we were talking about sports. Technology doesn't fail on its own. It only fails when the people running it don't know how to use it. The old man chuckled, unaware that the person who said that line understood better than anyone why those cars had frozen. The map on my laptop turned red. Entire areas shifted into full lockdown. The city's transportation department issued a public warning urging people to avoid traveling. Local news posted quickly. Downtown gridlock reaches historic level. At major intersections, emergency vehicles were forced to reroute again and again. A public camera showed a school bus trapped among autonomous cars, forcing children to get out and walk to the sidewalk. Chicago had officially stopped moving, and I knew that inside the Urban Ride control room, Dylan and Bella were standing in the middle of a chaos they couldn't parse. Their dashboard was good at changing colors. It wasn't built to control a city. I took another sip of coffee, now lukewarm. A strange calm settled in. Not because I wanted Chicago in this condition. I love this city. I spent 3 decades keeping its traffic flowing. But sometimes a failure is the only kind of lesson people bother to learn when it is big enough. And this one was far too big to ignore. My phone buzzed again, this time longer. I glanced at the caller ID, exactly who I expected. I have not answered yet. I wanted to give the city a few more minutes to absorb a simple truth. Technology does not collapse by itself. It collapses when the people running it think a prettier interface can replace real understanding. The wind from the river stirred the cafe curtain. I closed my laptop, letting the glowing red map fade from view. Chicago had frozen, and this was only the beginning of a call that I knew would change the fate of not just a few people inside Urban Ride, but an entire corporation. And I was about to answer it. The phone on the table rang again, long enough that even I let out a quiet breath. I picked it up and saw the caller. It wasn't Dylan this time, and it wasn't Bella. It was someone everyone at Urban Ride once respected, or at least once feared. I answered, Marcus speaking. On the other end, a deep voice, older than I remembered, exhaled before managing a word. Marcus, I assume you know what's happening. Chicago is in chaos. It was Reed, the former CEO, the man who built Urban Ride back when it was nothing more than a startup in a basement in Milwaukee. His voice now sounded like he had walked across the city in a snowstorm. I looked out the window. A police car was inching through a corridor of frozen traffic, its lights stretching across the surface of the river. Reed continued, They said you are the only one who can fix this. Marcus, I need you to come back. I heard the words clearly, without force, without authority. It was the voice of a man finally realizing something he used to overlook. Operators are never just operators. I stayed silent for a few seconds, long enough to hear his tired breathing through the line. Before I could respond, another call lit up my screen. Dylan. I let it ring and shift into waiting. I stayed with Reed. I know my son moved too fast. He said it slowly. And I know he let Bella meddle with something she could never understand. I am not defending them. I am just trying to keep this city from collapsing. His voice cracked. There was nothing of a CEO left in it. Only a man watching what he built slips out of his hands. I spoke gently. Reed, I didn't do anything. Clause 12.4 did exactly what it was created to do. That is all. I said nothing more, letting him find the meaning himself. He breathed out heavily once again. Marcus, I don't care about the past anymore. I need you to come back immediately. It didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a confession. I was about to respond when the second call flashed again. This time I switched over. Dylan spoke fast, as if trying to hold back a storm with his bare hands. Marcus, I was wrong. I am truly sorry. I didn't listen to you. I didn't understand the system the way you do. I see that now. You win. I closed my eyes for a second. He still didn't understand. This was never about winning or losing. Dylan went on breathless. Please, come back. I will make you the director of operations. Double your salary. Your own team, full decision power. I will sign everything right now. Just come back. Money, title, power, an apology. A year ago, I might have taken that as validation. Today, it sounded like tires spinning helplessly in thick mud. Before I could say anything, another voice joined in. Bella, she must have been on speaker. Marcus, her tone tried to soften, but the strain still leaked through. About the other day, it was all a misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to make things hard for you. I only thought we were trying to improve Urban Ride. Someone who had never worked a single night shift used the word improve. I looked out the window again. An autonomous car was frozen in the middle of the intersection, its lights blinking like a living reminder of the thing they dared to call improvement. I spoke, my voice calmer than I expected. Bella, Dylan, I am not angry at either of you. I never was. I am only disappointed. There was a small sound on the line, like someone holding their breath. I continued slowly, as if speaking to a room full of new technicians. Let me be clear. If I go back right now, I will be the one fixing what both of you created. That means I will legitimize your mistake. I will turn your actions into something excusable. I will set the precedent that ignoring protocol, disrespecting operations, and tinkering with something you do not understand is acceptable because someone will always return to clean up after you. I paused long enough for the weight to settle. But Chicago didn't freeze because of me. It froze because of your arrogance and your carelessness. I cannot return and turn that into something harmless. There was a long silence on their end. No excuses, no arguments, just Dylan's uneven breathing and the faint sound of Bella trying to steady herself. Finally, Dylan spoke, his voice almost breaking. Marcus, please. People are trapped. The police are calling nonstop. Reporters are outside the office. If you don't come back, Urban Ride will fall. I looked at my cold cup of coffee. Outside, Chicago remained still, like a frozen picture capturing the exact moment people believed they were smarter than the system they relied on. I answered quietly, not coldly, simply like a man who had long understood the truth. Dylan, you want me to save Urban Ride, but I won't save something built on disregard. I told you once already, innovation is not changing a user interface, and leadership is not imposing something you do not understand. Bella said nothing. For the first time, I heard her silence. I finished. And if I return now, I will teach everyone that your arrogance can pass as a bad idea, because Marcus will fix it in the end. I refused to do that. I heard Dylan try to say something, but I cut him off, my voice as steady as when clearing an error report. Good luck to both of you. Then I ended the call. There was no victory in it, no satisfaction, just the calm of a man finally setting down a burden he had carried too long. In the cafe, the coffee machine hummed steadily. Someone turned on the television into a news report about the citywide gridlock. An older woman shook her head, saying she had never seen Chicago this bad. I sat there watching the river move slowly, feeling lighter than I had in years, as if someone had finally opened a window that had been sealed shut. Sometimes the only way to prove your worth is not by staying and explaining. It is by leaving so people can understand on their own. And that day, they truly did. After hanging up on Dylan and Bella, I set the phone on the table and let it sit there for a few minutes. When you walk away from a place that held half your life, that silence carries weight. Not because of regret, but because you realize you have just stepped out of a dark room you spent years getting used to. I was about to put my laptop into my bag when the phone lit up again. An unfamiliar number, not Urban Ride, not any internal group. I answered. Sorry for the sudden call, a steady middle-aged male voice said. This is Owens from Metro Drive Systems. Is this Marcus Hale? I leaned back in my chair. Yes, speaking. Owens went straight to the point. We have been following your work for years, and today the entire industry knows what just happened. We know your real value. A simple sentence sharp as a needle landing exactly where the tension had been sitting inside me. I don't need praise, but after more than 30 years working in the shadows, hearing that from a leading urban operations company made me pause for a beat. Owens continued, we want to offer you the position of Chief Systems Architect at Metro Drive. I glanced out the cafe window. Traffic was still frozen. Chicago looked like someone had pressed pause on the entire city. I asked quietly, why me? I was fired today. Owens let out a soft laugh. Being fired by people who don't understand you is a form of praise. Urban Ride lost you. We prefer not to repeat their mistake. I stayed silent, not to think but to see if he would say the part I needed to hear. He did. The offer includes triple salary, fully remote work, and full autonomy over system architecture. No meetings with people who don't understand technology. No explaining yourself to people who never worked a single night shift but believe they know better. You build what you want to build. No interference. I placed my hand on the wooden table. The cafe felt warmer. The faint aroma of coffee remained in the air. Outside, the sky had deepened into the color of a Chicago evening, but inside me, a different kind of light turned on, one I had not felt in years. I thought about 2005. I was 35 then, driving along Western Avenue, when a crash happened right in front of me. A car lost control, slammed into a divider, spun sideways, and threw the driver out. I pulled over, ran toward him, and kept him conscious until the ambulance arrived. He survived, but I never forgot the look in his eyes, a mix of panic and helplessness, completely dependent on the people around him. After that accident, I promised myself I would spend my life making systems safer, so people like him would never have their lives hanging by a faulty algorithm or a careless department. In the early years, Urban Ride made me believe I was keeping that promise, until everything was replaced by pastel color palettes and weightless presentations. Owens continued, his voice steady and sincere. We need someone like you, Marcus. Someone who knows technology must be built for real people out there, not for a slideshow in a boardroom. I took a deep breath and looked outside. An autonomous car stood frozen, amber lights blinking. Reflected in the cafe glass was a city trapped between arrogance and the hard truth of engineering. I said, a week ago I might have hesitated, but not now. Owen spoke softly. I understand. We will wait for your decision. There was no need to wait. I answered immediately. I accept. I heard a quiet exhale on the other end, like someone nodding. Welcome to Metro Drive, Marcus. The call ended. I set the phone down and felt as if I had finally taken off a heavy suit of armor I had worn for far too long. For most of my career, I stood behind screens, working through nights no one else stayed awake for. But today, for the first time, I stepped out of the shadow of a system I had carried for years and into a completely new chapter. Not a chapter of burden, a chapter of freedom. I leaned back, listening to the soft dripping of the espresso machine behind the counter. A lightness settled on me, not the kind that comes from letting go, but the kind that comes from finally standing where you were always meant to stand. Outside, Chicago remained frozen. On my phone, the latest updates flashed. Urban Ride was facing not only gridlock, but a sharp financial hit. Their stock dropped over 20% in an hour. Shareholders called for an emergency meeting. The mayor demanded a full report. The press swarmed with questions about operational failures. This was only the beginning. I wasn't celebrating their downfall, but I wasn't denying the truth either. This was the direct result of their choices. When you ignore the foundation, the whole house collapses. Not a question of if, a question of when. And right now, it was collapsing exactly at the speed of the negligence that built it. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out. The river wind brushed my face, cold but comforting in the way it reminds you that some chapters close only so brighter ones can open. That evening, with distant sirens and flickering traffic lights painting the street, I walked without thinking about Urban Ride anymore. I thought about Metro Drive, about the new systems I would build, about the problems I had not been allowed to solve for years. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that the next chapter of my life was not about patching what was broken. It was about building something right from the start. 3 months passed faster than I expected. Spring arrived in Chicago, and Urban Ride entered a season of liquidation. Every morning's headlines were the same: stock plunging without breaks, a board in panic, and finally the announcement that the company had been sold off to a foreign conglomerate for a price so low, people checked the headline twice to believe it. Dylan was removed from the executive team during the first week of restructuring. A leaked internal memo said he no longer aligned with the company's future technical direction. A polite way of saying no one trusted him anymore. I read that update while drinking coffee at home and only raised an eyebrow. Not because I was pleased. I no longer attach emotion to things like that. But because I believed it should have happened long before the city froze. Bella kept herself busy in her own way. She launched a new podcast titled Healing from Negativity, a half-hour talk about listening to your inner voice and releasing positive energy. People watched it mostly for amusement, since in the introduction she claimed she once worked on large-scale urban traffic systems. People guessed she meant Fleet Corps. No one believed it, but everyone laughed. Chicago, meanwhile, changed in a different direction. The city recovered, slowly but steadily. Metro Drive rolled out the system architecture I designed. The corridors that once clogged now ran smoothly. Sudden stops dropped sharply. Traffic officers no longer had to stand in the middle of the street in the snow. And the people only saw one truth: the city was functioning again the way it was supposed to. No one knew my name. They did not need to. I had lived most of my life that way. The things I build do not need a signature to run. One April afternoon, I stood at the window of my new apartment, watching Chicago light up. The northern buildings reflected a pale purple sunset on the river. Every road pulsed with steady lights, no longer dotted with the red stains of that day. I let out a quiet breath, feeling a peace in my chest I had not found for years. Not because it was missing, but because my job had never allowed it. Working in operations means you hold the heartbeat of everything. And when everything works, no one remembers you. Only when it collapses do they call your name in desperation. Today, no one called me, and that might be the best feeling of all. I took a sip of coffee and thought about everything that had happened. Urban Ride did not fall because I left. They fell because they believed foundations did not matter, that a pretty interface could replace reality, that someone who works in silence could be swapped out for someone who has never worked a night shift. They misjudged everything, and I say this without arrogance, only with the plain truth of someone who has lived in this field far too long. I did not break anything. I just left. The rest was the price of undervaluing the wrong people. I watched the street a little longer. A Metro Drive autonomous car glided under my window, its lights reflecting across the freshly cleaned road. Smooth motion, no stutter, no hesitation. The city kept living, and this time it did not need me trailing behind patching leaks. And for the first time in years, the future did not feel like a weight to carry. It felt like a road I could walk without needing to look back. I set my cup down, opened the window to let the air in, and looked directly at the city. The blend of street lights and the last trace of daylight formed a stillness only someone from operations would understand. It was the moment everything ran the way it should, without anyone standing behind it holding things together. I stepped back inside, turned on the recorder, and smiled faintly. I have always preferred ending stories with silence, but listeners usually want a farewell. So I spoke, my voice lower than usual. If you made it this far, thank you sincerely. I know time is something everyone weighs more carefully at this age. If you enjoy stories about quiet people who are far from weak, about people who are underestimated until the truth speaks for them, subscribe to the channel so I have a reason to pour another cup of coffee and tell you the next story. I pressed stop, closed the window, and let Chicago keep shining the way it was always meant to. Stable, clear, and built by people who understand what they are doing. Competence is expensive, and sometimes its price is only seen when you are no longer there.